All right, y'all. So for today's video, I want to talk about my personal opinion for the first and second team All Pros. As I'm recording this, wildcard weekend just wrapped up. The season's over for pretty much every team. So the plus the All Pro teams just came out. So let's just get right into it. For the first team, quarterback wise, I'm gonna go with Lamar Jackson, same as the original voters. 45 total touchdowns, 8 turnovers. 4,100 passing yards on 66% completion. Lamar was dominant the whole season. He had a little bit of bumps here and there, but so does everyone. I think Lamar had the most impressive and best, 17 game stretch out of any quarterback, and he's deservingly so of first team All Pro. I don't think he wouldn't be my MVP, but I think like best player. He's the best player this season, but he's not the most valuable. I would still give it to Allen. But for first team All Pro, you're voting on best. So Lamar's gonna get that nod. Second, Saquon Barkley, another like not really close pick. Derrick Henry did have a great year, but Saquon had 2,005 yards, 13 touchdowns, 5.8 each. Henry had the similar stats, but with like 100 less yards and one extra game played than Barkley. So I think Barkley again, because he was in the running to get that Eric Dickerson rushing record. So to have, a running back of that caliber, have a season for a running back of that caliber is very impressive, and you have to have him first team. For the fullback, not many teams use fullback, so you just go reliable Pat Ricard. He gets a lot of playing time. For tight end, another like not really close one, Brock Bowers, 112 catches, 1,194 yards, 5 touchdowns, 10.7 per catch yards per catch. Brock Bowers, like you could tell by like 3 weeks in, you're like, okay, this guy's legit. He was touted a generational tight end prospect for a reason, and with like Kelsey and even Kittle, Hawkinson, Laporta, like a bunch of the older tight ends having like these slight regressions, Brock Bowers stepped up. He had a phenomenal season, the only bright spot of that Raiders offense, and he just went berserk. He went berserk. He had like a 3 week stretch where he was just kind of like, they were basically like force feeding him the ball, but they had no other choice. Wide receiver one, I'm going to go Triple Crown winner Jamar Chase, 127 catches, 1,700 yards, 7 TDs, 13.4 each. Not much to say here. I agree with the voters on that part. So, Chase was just out of his mind this season. One of the few bright spots for Cincinnati, trying to will them into the playoffs on his own. Wide receiver two, Justin Jefferson, 103 catches, 1,533 yards, 10 tutties, 14.9 each. Same old. Jefferson's going to get his 1,500 every season. He's going to be a first team every season because he's, one of the best or second best receiver in football day in and day out. Plus the things he's able to do to open up for the rest of the Vikings offense, really special. Now, the first change I have in my list compared to the voters and official list is at wide receiver three, I'm going to have Brian Thomas. 87 catches, 1,282 yards, 10 touchdowns, 14.7 each. He had less than 90 yards, but he still had 1,200. He had less than 90 catches, but he still had 1,200 yards. Very impressive to see with the rookie. And he was dealing with Mac Jones for half the season. Like, you have to take that into account, that he's playing with a backup for half the season. And arguably, that he had his best stretch in the second half of the season with Mac Jones. So it's something you really can't overlook. I think Brian Thomas, absolute stud, and he put himself like, right now he's probably in that like 7 through 12 tier already. Absolute beast of a wide receiver. Left tackle, I'm gonna go Tristan Wirfs. Elite left tackle, helped pioneer the Bucks offense into being elite. He's great. He was great on the right side, switched to the left side, picked right back up. Joe Tooney at left guard, he's been phenomenal for the Chiefs this year. A big turnaround. They moved him around a little bit on the offensive line because of injuries, but Tooney has also been a huge stone for the Kansas City Chiefs this season and a big part of their success. Keeping up with the Chiefs' success, I'm going to go with Creed Humphrey at center. I believe that's who the voters had as well. Just the interior for the Chiefs' offensive line is very, very elite. So you gotta keep that going. At right guard, I'm gonna go Trey Smith. It may sound crazy, but I'm gonna have the entire Chiefs' offensive line as the interior, for my first team All Pro because they were just special. Like pretty much those three were the best at their positions pretty much the entire season with not much up for debate, for the most part. I feel confident in those three picks between Tooney, Humphrey and Trey Smith at the guards and centers. Lane Johnson at right tackle. I'm surprised he wasn't first team, but I mean Lane Johnson kept up his dominance even without being able to notoriously quote unquote false start or jump the snap with Kelsey. Even without that, he was still super dominant. I think he'd let him maybe a sack this year, a couple pressures, but for the most part, he was shut down. He was totally shut down. So that was the first team offense. The only changes I had was I had Brian Thomas at wide receiver 3 instead of Amon Ra. At right guard, I had Trey Smith. And at right tackle, I had Lane Johnson instead of Penei Sewell. Now, on the defense, for the most part, I'm going to agree with the voters also. At edge, I'm going to have Myles Garrett. 22 tackles for losses, 14 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, and 83 pressures. It's Myles Garrett. He's always going to have these numbers. He's always going to be a beast. And he's always going to be first or second team with not much argument. I think he did a great job this year of getting that sack total up there. I believe he's third in sacks with 14. So I think he did a great job in that. But at my second edge, I'm going to have the sack leader in Trey Hendrickson. 17.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 19 tackle for losses, and again, 83 pressures. Hendrickson, the one bright spot in the Bengals defense that was absolutely atrocious, but he was doing his job, and that's all you can do, really. Hendrickson was doing his job, being a consistent pressure threat, down in, down out. Defensive tackle, you got Grandpa Cameron Hayward. I'm going to go with him. He had a B season, arguably better than TJ Watt. If we're going to keep it real, Cameron Hayward had a great season. 71 tackles, 8 sacks, 56 pressures. The pressures isn't spectacular, but he was getting those sack numbers. And in the run game, he was doing his thing. He's a pivotal part in Pittsburgh's defense, and I think he had a phenomenal season. The other D tackle, he's always been up there, the defensive player that you're running. I'm going to go with Chris Jones for the other D tackle. 37 tackles, 5 sacks, 74 pressures. Now, it was, I was debating on putting Chris Jones on the second team because he only had 37 tackles, but at the end of the day, having 74 pressures is absolutely huge. And plus, the things that the creativity the Chiefs are able to do around Chris Jones is massive and things that go above the stat sheet. So I'm just going to play it safe and put Chris Jones at my second D tackle for the first team. For my first linebacker, you know who it is. It's going to be Fred Warner, 98 tackles, and 4 forced fumbles with the 89.2 PFF grade. Fred Warner, he's probably a Hall of Famer. He's been around forever. He's been elite he's been the best linebacker for at least 6 years now. Absolute stud. The second one, you don't even have to think about, is Roquan Smith. 103 tackles and a 65 PFF grade and 1 forced fumble. The first half was a bit shaky, but the Ravens kind of changed it around. They switched it up a little bit. And in the second half of the year, Roquan Smith really got back to his normal form of being an elite linebacker. So, you do have to take that into consideration. Plus, also, linebacker is generally a pretty weak group when it comes to picking these all-pro teams. So, Roquan's still going to get the nod, without question. And my third linebacker, I'm going to go with Zach Brown, the linebacker for the Eagles. 111 tackles, a 90 PFF grade, and 5 forced fumbles. Absolute monster flying around the field everywhere. Linebacker's been an issue for the Eagles for years now, and it looks like they finally found their guy in Braun. I'm fucking it up right now, but that's who I'm gonna go with. He was a huge player. If there was a most improved player of the year in the NFL, it would probably be him. So great season. Now in the secondary for my cornerback, I'm gonna go with Pat Surtain, 85.6 PFF grade and 4 picks. He was shut down. He's been the best corner since he stepped foot in the NFL. He's been the best corner in football, even with Sauce, even with all these other guys. It's been Pat Surtain, and he's likely going to be the defensive player of the year for it, deservingly so. He's been shutting down these receivers. He travels too, which not many guys do anymore. That's no question. The next corner I have is going to be a change-up, the first change-up for the defense, and I'm going to go with Christian Gonzalez for New England. 76 PFF grade, 2 interceptions. And watching the Pats game, he was really the only bright spot. Plus, the thing that Gonzalez has that Surtain and the other corner don't have is he doesn't have the pass rush. And so not having a pass rush makes things much harder on the corner because now you're having to cover for 3 seconds instead of 2 seconds. You're going to have to cover during scramble drill and whatnot when the route breaks and the play develops. So I think Gonzalez just had a harder time, a harder situation to work with, and he was still getting the job done. Where, every week the Pats defense was going to be ass, but you knew at least the cornerback one situation was going to be figured out. And for the other corner, I'm going to go another change. I'm going to go with Trent McDuffie. He had a 78 PFF grade, 2 interceptions as well. And McDuffie's really stepped into his own the past 2 seasons. He's been on the more underrated side. He's not flashy and all that, but McDuffie has been notorious for shutting down people. Shut down. His best game was probably the Steelers at the end of the season. Great, just overall great player. McDuffie's been a stud and deservingly needs this first team All-Pro. For the safeties, it's not much to think about. I'm going to go with Kirby Joseph out of Detroit. 91 PFF grade, 71 tackles, 9 interceptions. Absolute ball hog, but also a tone setter for that defense. The knee-capping mentality, and I think Kirby Joseph really instilled that and was a leader for the Lions even throughout all these injuries. And the other safety is Xavier McKinney, 85 PFF grade, 62 tackles, and 8 interceptions. Safety's been a weak spot for the Packers for years. They go out in free agency, get McKinney, and he's better than he ever was with the Giants. McKinney's been out of his mind in a relatively weak secondary for the Packers, and he's been able to play good, pick it up on himself. So, the first team, there were only 5 changes. Wide receiver 3, Brian Thomas. Right guard, Trey Smith. Right tackle, Lane Johnson. Cornerback 2 and 3, and McDuffie and Christian Gonzalez. Those are the only changes I had in the first team. Pretty cookie cutter. There's not much you can really wiggle around with. But now I'm going to get to my second team. And this one's where I got a little bit more creative. Try to throw some guys in and out. At quarterback, I'm going to go with Josh Allen. The other guy in the MVP running. 40 total touchdowns, 7 turnovers, 3,700 yards, and a 63% completion percentage. Now, again, if I'm voting for MVP, I would have voted for Josh Allen. He's more valuable. He's doing more with less. But on a stat standpoint and who had a better, more dominant season, it's Lamar Jackson. So Allen's going to, get demoted to second team, which is still impressive. But at the end of the day, not too many people were in consideration for it. I guess you could have said Burrow, but you can't be that good as a quarterback if you have 8 losses. So that's a whole nother story. For running back, I'm going to go with Derrick Henry. 1,900 rushing yards, 16 touchdowns, 5.9 each. Completely just dominant. Whenever the Ravens fed him the ball, they won the game. Because you watch the end of the season, especially wild card week just wrapped up, and the Ravens rushed for 300 rushing yards. They ran the ball 16 times in a row. They're just feeding Henry, and there's nothing teams can really do about it. Absolute beast. At fullback, I could have gone Kyle Juszczyk out of San Fran, but I'm actually gonna give it to Scott Matlock, the fullback out of the Chargers, turned D lineman. I think that's pretty cool. He's gotten some good burn here and there. Has helped develop the running game a little bit in the Chargers. So, that was more of a fun change-up. It's fullback. And my wide receiver 1 for the second team, I'm going to put Malik Neighbors. 109 catches, 1,200 yards, 7 touchdowns with 11 yards each. Absolute beast with probably the worst quarterback situation in the league. I mean, they were just rotating guys between Drew Lock, Daniel Jones, and who's the other one? Tommy DeVito. That's embarrassing. And he was still putting up 100 yards week in and week out. He did have some injuries, but he was still the one bright spot. And what they would do is they would just throw him up the ball. Just chuck it up, and he would come down with it most of the time. Neighbors is a game changer. He's a stud. My wide receiver 2, I'm going to go with Amon-Ra St. Brown. 115 catches, 1,200 yards, 12 touchdowns with 11 yards each. Another great consistent season by Amon-Ra. I think this year he finally got those catch yards, and he finally got the stats to back up this consistency. He's been a stud for a couple of years now, but Amon-Ra is a pretty safe pick. He is in a high-flying offense, so I think the biggest difference between Brian Thomas and Amon-Ra is Brian Thomas had a much tougher situation to deal with. They put up similar numbers, but Thomas had a much tougher situation. The play calling wasn't as good. You had Mac Jones instead of Jared Goff and all these weapons. So Amon-Ra, he was still a great season, but I did have to knock him a little bit for that. At wide receiver 3, I'm going to put CeeDee Lamb. 101 receiving yards, basically 1,200 yards, 6 touchdowns, 11.8 each. He did have to deal with a backup quarterback for half the season, and his production never really took a fall. He did have his highs and lows. He's notorious for that, but CeeDee Lamb, week in and week out, you could count on him to be the bright spot of the Cowboys' struggling offense. Very disappointing team, but the CD still got his 1,200 yards. At tight end, I'm going to switch it up. I'm going to go Trey McBride out of the Cardinals. 111 catches, 1,100 yards, 2 touchdowns, 10.3 each. Now, yes, the touchdown numbers aren't really there, but McBride really, like, showed out this year. He really, like, lived up to these high expectations. He had a good, strong finish last year, carried that right over to this year, and again, with a lot of other tight ends, like, kind of slipping down a little bit with the Kittles, the Kelseys, and the Hawkinsons. Trey McBride stepped up and took their place into that elite tier of tight ends. I think he really, like, helped change life for Kyler Murray. At left tackle, I'm going to go with Jordan Mailata, left tackle for the Eagles. He was a beast. He's been consistent. I mean, a couple holding calls here and there, but for the most part, Mailata has been a very consistent, great gem that the Eagles have been able to develop. At left guard, I'm going to go with Tyler Smith, left guard out of Dallas Cowboys. So he's always been one of my favorite players. He's a great run blocker, very tenacious, and probably the one bright spot for the aging offensive line. I know Zach Martin's still there, but he's getting up there. So probably the one bright spot in that Cowboys offensive line is Tyler Smith. I think he had a very good season as well. Center, Frank Ragnow for Detroit. You know, the leader of probably the best collective offensive line in the league, at least top 5. The right guard, Chris Lindstrom, another elite season. I can't remember his PFF grade, but it was like it was something in the 90s. I know he was top 5 in that as well. Lindstrom had a good season. And Penei Sewell at the right tackle. You know, you're on one of the best on lines, and he's one of the best leaders and head fronts for that. So, gotta reward Penei Sewell. So, and then that's the offense. That's my second team all-pro offense. For my second pro all-team defense, for edge, I'm gonna have Nick Benito. 15 sacks, 20 tackles, 57 pressures, and this was really his showing out party. This was the year where he really like took that next step forward and showed out. I know he had some Defensive Player of the Year buzz, which is very impressive. To get to that 15 sack number is, you know, it's not easy to do. I think he was second or third in sacks across the league. So Nick Benito, absolute beast this year. And second, I'm just gonna go T.J. Watt. You know, there were a couple guys, you know, you could have put in here, but you're just going to keep it simple. I'm just going to go T.J. Watt, 12 sacks, 35 tackles, 53 pressures. He's always been up there in like double team rates and chip block rates. So I'm not going to overcomplicate that one. D tackle, Jalen Carter, same as the voters. 42 tackles, 4.5 sacks, 53 pressures. Now, the thing about Carter that impresses me is he wasn't even playing down in and down out. You know, the Eagles run a rotation. So to still get 53 pressures, 42 tackles, and basically 5 sacks in a rotation is very impressive to me because, you know, you're playing less snaps. There's less opportunity for it, and you're still getting some good value out of it. Very, very nice to see. The other D tackle, this was another switch up for me. I put Leonard Williams out of Seattle. 64 tackles, 11 sacks, 55 pressures. I mean, 11 sacks for a defensive tackle is very, very impressive. I mean, you don't really see that too much. I know they moved him a lot around the defensive line, but I'm going to just classify him as a D tackle. And again, this was a career year for Leonard Williams. He was great this season. He was really a stud. So I think I wanted to recognize that. My first linebacker, I'm going to go with Bobby Wagner. I mean, he's been here for decades. He's a shoo-in. 95 tackles, a 90 PFF grade, and 1 forced fumble. He's always been a tackling machine. His tackle numbers have always been high. I know it's not the best indication, but, you know, Bobby still got something left in the tank. He's not a complete washed player. The other linebacker, this might be a little bit of a reach, but I'm going to go with Nick Bolton out of Kansas City. 81 tackles, 65 PFF grade, and 1 forced fumble. One of the leaders in one of the best defenses in the NFL, so I wanted to do that. Again, linebackers, I'm kind of stretching. I was, like, debating between a few guys. So I just went with Nick Bolton there, not too much. The other linebacker, this was a little bit of a cheat because he plays a lot of edge, but I'm going to go with Andrew Van Ginkel out of Minnesota. 79 tackles, 12 sacks, and 50 pressures. I would say he is more edge, but they do drop him into coverage a good amount. So I decided to cheat a little bit on there. He had a great coming out party. They got him on a discount from Miami. So Van Ginkel had a great season. Another one of those like most improved players. He was a stud this year and a real like big leader in the transformation of the Vikings defense. In the secondary, I'm going to go with Marlon Humphrey. Now I believe in the official they had him first team. For me, I'm going to have Marlon Humphrey on the second team. So He had an 81 PFF grade and 6 interceptions. He switched between the slot and the inside, or slot and the outside, which is good to see. It's good to see the versatility and whatnot. But I do think Marlon Humphrey, he had a good season. He's been consistent. He had a down year a couple years ago, but for the most part, he's always been in that upper echelon of corners. Cornerback 2, I'm going to go with Derek Stingley. Derek Stingley, again, took that big leap this year. You could tell from rookie year to last year to this year, Stingley getting slightly better, and then this year he really exploded. His interception numbers, he got 5 picks this year, a 74 PFF grade. So he finally, he got the right system going around him. He really fit in well. He was able to be a huge part in the Texans defense, becoming an elite unit. And, just coming into his own as a shutdown corner. I'm proud to see it. It's good to see. Now, the other corner, he could be corner, slot, safety. They move him around a bit. Brian Branch out of Detroit, a 77.6 PFF grade, 4 picks. And again, another guy that, even with all the injuries on the defense, Brian Branch held down the fort, held down that mentality of toughness, and was just a great chess piece that they can move him around a lot. I really appreciate that out of Branch. And then the next safety, not too much thought. I know he had some injuries and whatnot, but Kyle Hamilton, 90 PFF grade and 1 pick, absolute beast. I remember watching the Ravens game, and they showed this graphic where when they played Hamilton in the slot from weeks 1 through 11, they were awful. But when they moved him to traditional safety from weeks 11 onward, they were the best defense in the league. So that's very impressive to see. And the last safety spot, I'm going to go with Derwin James. 80 PFF grade and 1 pick. Another big enforcer. He's always been a great player. Run defense. Great ball hog, flying around. So, you got to appreciate that for Derwin James. But, those are my 2 teams for the All-Pro. That's all. Y'all be good.